May 26, 1937, 2:13 p.m., Miller Road, Overpass, Dearborn, Michigan. Jimmy Hoffa stood at the bottom of the overpass stairs, looking up at the bridge that connected Gate 4 of Ford's River Rouge plant to the streetcar station. 40 men stood behind him, union organizers, teamsters, men who drove trucks loaded freight and broke their backs for $4 a day. They were here to hand out leaflets. That's it. Pieces of paper explaining why Ford workers should join the United Auto Workers Union. Legal, peaceful, constitutional. But Henry Ford didn't care about constitutional rights. He cared about control. And Jimmy Hoffa, 24 years old, skinny, with a broken nose from too many street fights, was about to learn exactly how far Ford would go to keep that control. At the top of the overpass, 300 men waited. Ford's service department. That's what they called it, security. But everyone knew the truth. They were thugs, strikebreakers, ex-convicts, boxers, street fighters, men hired specifically to hurt people. And their boss, Harry Bennett, had given them one order. Nobody distributes union propaganda at my plant. Nobody. Jimmy Hoffa looked at the men behind him. Some were nervous, some were angry. All of them were waiting for him to make the call. "We're going up there," Hoffa said. "We hand out the leaflets. We don't start trouble. But if they start it, we finish it." One of the organizers, a guy named Michael, grabbed Hoffa's arm. "Jimmy, there's 300 of them, 40 of us. This is suicide." Hoffa pulled his arm free. "Then go home. But I'm walking up those stairs, and I'm handing out leaflets, because if we back down now, we back down forever." Nobody went home. At 2:15 p.m., Jimmy Hoffa and 40 union men started climbing the stairs to the Miller Road overpass. To understand why Jimmy Hoffa walked into that trap, you need to understand what Ford's River Rouge plant meant in 1937. It was the largest factory in the world, 100,000 workers, a mile long. It had its own steel mill, its own power plant, its own railroad. Raw materials went in one end. Iron ore, coal, rubber, and finished automobiles came out the other. Henry Ford built an empire, and he ruled it like a king. But by 1937, that empire was cracking. The Great Depression had radicalized workers. They were tired of 12-hour shifts, poverty wages, and foremen who treated them like cattle. Across America, unions were organizing. General Motors had just been forced to recognize the UAW after a massive sit-down strike. Ford swore it would never happen at his plant. That's where Harry Bennett came in. Bennett was Ford's enforcer. Short, mean, with dead eyes, and a history of violence that made grown men nervous. He ran the service department like a private army. If you talked about unions at River Rouge, you got fired. If you kept talking, you got beaten. If you still kept talking, you disappeared. But Jimmy Hoffa wasn't afraid of Harry Bennett. Hoffa had been organizing since he was 18 years old. Started with a wildcat strike at a grocery warehouse in Detroit. Stopped work until the boss gave them better conditions. It worked. And Hoffa learned something that day. Power doesn't negotiate with weakness. Power only respects force. By 1937, Hoffa was a rising star in the Teamsters, not the president, not yet. But everyone knew he was going somewhere. He was smart, fearless, and he had something most organizers didn't have. He could fight. Street fights, bar fights, fights with strikebreakers and company cops. Hoffa had been knocked down 100 times, and he'd gotten up 101. May 26, 1937. The UAW asked the Teamsters to help distribute leaflets at Ford's plant. The UAW guys were scared. They'd heard stories about Bennett's goons. So they asked Hoffa, "You want us to walk onto Ford property and hand out union leaflets in front of Harry Bennett's army?" "That's the idea," Hoffa smiled. "When?" That afternoon, 2 p.m., Hoffa assembled his crew, 40 guys. Some were Teamsters, some were UAW, some were just working men who'd had enough. They met at a diner 2 blocks from the plant. Hoffa laid it out plain. "We're going to the Miller Road overpass. It's public property. Ford doesn't own it. We hand out leaflets to workers leaving the shift. We don't trespass. We don't provoke. We just exercise our constitutional right to free speech." One of the guys, an older teamster named Frank, shook his head. "Jimmy, Bennett's going to have guys waiting." "I know. So this is a setup. We're walking into an ambush." Hoffa looked around the room. 40 faces, some young, some old, all of them scared but trying not to show it. "Yeah, it's a setup, but here's the thing. They're expecting us to back down. They're expecting us to hear there's 300 guys up there and just go home. And if we do that, if we show fear, Ford wins. Every factory in Detroit will know the union's backed down and will never organize another plant. So we get our asses kicked for publicity?" "We get our asses kicked," Hoffa said, "and then we make sure every newspaper in America knows Ford Motor Company sent 300 thugs to beat up 40 guys handing out leaflets. We lose the fight. We win the war." At 2:15 p.m. they started walking toward the overpass. But what Jimmy Hoffa didn't know was that Henry Ford had given Harry Bennett permission to do whatever was necessary. And Bennett's definition of necessary was about to put 4 men in the hospital. The Miller Road overpass was about 50 feet long, iron and concrete. It spanned the road connecting Ford's Gate 4 to the streetcar stop where workers caught rides home. Public property, technically. But as Hoffa and his 40 men approached, it was clear Ford didn't care about technicalities. At the top of the overpass, men were waiting. Lots of men, big men, men in dark suits and fedoras, men with scarred knuckles and flat expressions. Harry Bennett's service department. Hoffa counted as he climbed. 50 guys at the top of the stairs, maybe more behind them, all positioned to block the overpass. But Hoffa kept walking. So did his crew. When they reached the top, a wall of men stood in their way. The leader stepped forward. His name was Ted Gunderson, 6'4", former boxer, Bennett's top enforcer. He looked at Hoffa like you'd look at a bug. "Turn around." Hoffa pulled a stack of leaflets from his jacket. "We're here to distribute these. Public property, First Amendment." "I don't give a fuck about the First Amendment. Turn around." Hoffa smiled. That smile. The one that made people nervous because it meant Hoffa was about to do something stupid or brilliant, and nobody ever knew which. "We're not turning around." Gunderson's face went red. "You got 5 seconds. Then what, you gonna hit me? In front of all these witnesses?" Hoffa gestured to the street below, and that's when Gunderson realized Hoffa had planned this. There were photographers down there, newspapermen, the Detroit News, the Detroit Free Press, cameras ready. Hoffa had tipped them off, told them something was going to happen at the Miller Road overpass at 2:30 p.m., told them to bring cameras. Because Hoffa understood something Harry Bennett didn't. In 1937, a photograph was more powerful than a fist. Gunderson hesitated, looked back at the service department guys behind him. They were waiting for the order. And then, from somewhere in the crowd of Ford men, someone yelled, "Get these Union bastards off our bridge." That's all it took. The first punch came from behind. Sucker punch. Caught one of Hoffa's guys, a teamster named Richard Frankenstein, square in the jaw. Frankenstein went down. Then it was chaos. What happened in the next 8 minutes would be photographed, documented, and shown in newspapers across America. And the images were so brutal, so shocking, that even people who hated unions couldn't defend what Ford did. 300 men against 40. It wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. The service department guys swarmed like wolves. Fists, clubs, brass knuckles. They didn't just hit. They demolished. Jimmy Hoffa saw it happening, saw his guys getting pulled down, stomped, beaten, saw Richard Frankenstein, one of the UAW's top organizers, getting kicked in the ribs while he was curled on the ground. And Hoffa did the only thing he knew how to do. He fought back. Hoffa wasn't big. 5'5", maybe 160 pounds. But he'd been fighting since he was a kid in the slums of Detroit. He knew how to take a punch. More importantly, he knew how to keep getting up. The first guy who grabbed him was huge, probably 220 pounds, ex-boxer. He swung a haymaker at Hoffa's head. Hoffa ducked, came up inside, drove his fist into the guy's solar plexus. The guy doubled over. Hoffa grabbed him by the collar, used his momentum to throw him into two more service department thugs. But there were too many. Four more grabbed Hoffa from behind, dragged him to the ground, started kicking, ribs, back, head. Hoffa tried to cover up, tried to protect his skull, but the boots kept coming. And through the pain, through the blood, Hoffa heard something. Cameras clicking. The photographers were shooting. Every punch, every kick, every moment of Ford's service department beating unarmed men half to death. Hoffa started laughing, not because it was funny, because he'd won. One of Bennett's guys heard him laughing, leaned down. What the hell's so funny? Hoffa spit blood. You're going to be famous, asshole. Front page tomorrow. The guy's face went pale, looked around, saw the cameras, realized what they'd done. But it was too late to stop. For 8 minutes, the beating continued. Men were thrown down the stairs, kicked in the face. One guy got his arm broken in 3 places. Another lost 4 teeth. Richard Frankenstein took the worst of it. 7 men surrounded him, beat him until he was unconscious, then kept beating him. Jimmy Hoffa took the second worst. Broken ribs, fractured cheekbone, concussion, blood everywhere. But every time they knocked him down, Hoffa got back up. Not because he was brave, because he was stubborn. Because backing down wasn't in his DNA. The 5th time they knocked him down, one of Bennett's lieutenants, a guy named Sam Taylor, stood over him. "Stay down, Hoffa, we'll kill you." Hoffa looked up through swollen eyes. "Then kill me, but I'm not staying down." He tried to get up again. Taylor kicked him in the ribs. Hoffa collapsed, gasping. And finally, mercifully, someone blew a whistle. Harry Bennett himself, watching from a car at the bottom of the overpass, realized the photographers had enough. Any more, and this would look like attempted murder. "That's enough. Let him go." The service department guys backed off. Slowly, reluctantly, 40 Union men lay on that overpass, some unconscious, some bleeding, all of them hurt. But they'd done it. They'd stood up to Henry Ford, and the cameras had captured everything. What Jimmy Hoffa didn't know, bleeding on that concrete, ribs broken, face destroyed, was that this beating would be his greatest victory. Because by tomorrow morning, the whole world would know what Ford Motor Company did to men who wanted a union. Detroit Receiving Hospital. 4:47 p.m. Jimmy Hoffa sat on a gurney in the emergency room. A nurse was trying to clean the blood off his face. Hoffa kept pushing her away. "I'm fine." "Sir, your cheekbone is fractured. You have 3 broken ribs. You need x-rays." "I need a phone." The nurse sighed, pointed to the hallway. Hoffa stood up, every movement agony, and limped to the payphone. He called the Teamster's office. His boss, a guy named Bert Brennan, answered. "Jesus Christ, Jimmy, we heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Did the photographers get it?" "Get it?" "Jimmy, you're going to be on the front page of every paper in America. The pictures they're bad, Jimmy. Really bad." Hoffa smiled, winced because smiling hurt. "Good. Good. You got the shit kicked out of you. And Ford's going to pay for it." Across the hall, in another emergency room, Richard Frankenstein was in worse shape, broken jaw, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The doctor said he'd be in the hospital for a week. But Frankenstein was conscious, and when Hoffa limped into his room, Frankenstein managed a bloody smile. "We did it, Jimmy." "Yeah, we did." "Think it'll matter?" Hoffa looked out the window. Down on the street he could see reporters gathering, newsreel cameras, radio stations. The story was already spreading. "It'll matter." The next morning, May 27th, 1937, the photographs hit every newspaper in America. The Battle of the Overpass. The images were shocking, brutal, undeniable. Richard Frankenstein being beaten by 7 men while he lay helpless on the ground. Jimmy Hoffa, blood streaming down his face, trying to stand up while Ford's thugs surrounded him. Union organizers being thrown downstairs like garbage. The headlines were just as brutal. Detroit News. Ford servicemen beat Union organizers. New York Times, violence at Ford plant, organizers hospitalized. Washington Post, Ford's private army attacks peaceful demonstrators. Public opinion turned overnight. People who'd never cared about unions suddenly cared, because those photographs didn't show dangerous radicals or communist agitators. They showed working men, unarmed men, getting beaten half to death for handing out leaflets. Henry Ford tried to spin it, claimed the union guys started it, claimed they were trespassing, claimed the service department was just defending Ford property. Nobody believed him. The photographs told the truth. 3 days later, the National Labor Relations Board opened an investigation into Ford Motor Company for violating workers' rights. 6 months later, Ford was forced to allow union organizers on company property. 4 years later, 1941, Henry Ford, the man who swore he'd never recognize a union, signed a contract with the UAW. The Battle of the Overpass broke Ford's resistance, and it made Jimmy Hoffa a legend. June 1937, 1 week after the beating. Jimmy Hoffa sat in his small apartment in Detroit, ribs still taped, face still bruised, but he was reading every newspaper he could get his hands on. The Battle of the Overpass was national news. Editorials demanding Ford be held accountable, congressmen calling for investigations, churches, civic groups, even some business leaders saying Ford went too far. Hoffa's phone rang. He picked up. "Jimmy Hoffa?" "Yeah." "This is Eleanor Roosevelt." Hoffa almost dropped the phone. "Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States." "Ma'am?" "Mr. Hoffa, I saw the photographs from the Overpass. I wanted to tell you that what you and your men did took tremendous courage, and I want you to know that the labor movement has allies in Washington." Hoffa didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing that came to mind, "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. Just keep fighting." She hung up. Hoffa sat there for a long moment, holding the phone, and he understood something. Violence could break bones, but photographs could break empires. Ford had 300 men, fists, clubs, all the power in the world. But Hoffa had cameras, and the truth. And in 1937 America, a country still believing in fairness, still believing in the underdog, the truth was more powerful than any beating. Over the next 20 years, Jimmy Hoffa used that lesson again and again. When trucking companies sent strikebreakers, Hoffa made sure photographers were there. When corrupt cops arrested union organizers on fake charges, Hoffa held press conferences. When politicians tried to smear the Teamsters, Hoffa went on television and told his story. The story of a working-class kid who got beaten for handing out leaflets and never backed down. The Battle of the Overpass became Hoffa's origin story. The moment he went from organizer to legend. And every time someone asked him, in interviews, in hearings, in conversations, "Why do you fight so hard?" Hoffa would point to the scar on his cheekbone, the one that never quite healed right. "Because I learned something on that overpass. You can beat me, you can break my bones, you can put me in the hospital, but you can't make me quit. And every time you hit me, every time you knock me down, I get back up, and I bring more people with me." That was Jimmy Hoffa, and that's why, 38 years later, when the mob finally killed him, they had to do it quietly, in secret, with no witnesses. Because if Jimmy Hoffa had seen it coming, if there'd been cameras, if there'd been anyone watching, he would have fought back, and he would have won. The Battle of the Overpass photographs are still famous today. You can find them in history books, museums, labor union halls. They show something raw and true, the cost of standing up, the price of dignity. Jimmy Hoffa paid that price on May 26, 1937. Broken ribs, fractured face, blood on the concrete, but he got something back. Respect. Not from Henry Ford, not from Harry Bennett, not from the people who hated unions, from workers, from the men and women who saw those photographs and thought, if that guy can take a beating and get back up, maybe I can stand up too. That's Hoffa's real legacy. Not the corruption, not the mob ties, not the disappearance, the Miller Road Overpass. May 26, 1937, 2:15 p.m. 40 men walked onto a bridge to hand out leaflets. 300 thugs beat them half to death. And Jimmy Hoffa, 24 years old, broken but unbroken, proved that sometimes losing a fight is how you win a war. Drop a comment. If you were Jimmy Hoffa, would you have walked onto that overpass knowing what was waiting? Because that decision, that refusal to back down, defined everything that came after. Hit subscribe for the next untold Hoffa story. The night Hoffa sat down with the Detroit mob and made a deal that would make him the most powerful man in America, and eventually get him killed.